In the depths of winter 1347, a scribe in the Vatican archives made a discovery that would haunt him until his dying breath. Hidden beneath layers of official correspondence, sealed with wax bearing three intertwined symbols, a rose, a serpent, and a dragon, lay a manuscript that should not have existed. The moment his trembling fingers broke that ancient seal, something stirred in the collective unconscious of humanity, a ripple that we are only now beginning to understand. The scribe wrote in his final letter, discovered centuries later, "I have opened what was meant to remain closed. She who sleeps in the blood of the earth is stirring, and the foundations of our world tremble at her awakening." This was no mere document. According to whispered legends among the initiated, it was a codex containing the suppressed teachings of the dragon goddess, that primordial feminine force whose very mention had been systematically erased from the sacred texts of three major world religions. The manuscript spoke of a being who existed before the patriarchal sky gods claimed dominion, before the separation of spirit from flesh, before humanity forgot its original covenant with the source. She was the Rosa Mystica bleeding into serpentine wisdom, the Ouroboros of creation and destruction, the divine feminine that needed no temple because she was the living temple itself. As Clarissa Pinkola Estes wrote in her groundbreaking work on the wild feminine, when women reassert their relationship with the wildish nature, they are greeted with a number of psychic deaths, but they are also blessed with numerous psychic births. Oh dear, but what if this reassertion is not merely psychological, but archetypal? What if we are witnessing not just individual women reclaiming their power, but the return of an ancient goddess who was deliberately buried beneath centuries of patriarchal programming? Tonight, as our civilization teeters on the edge of transformation, as old structures crumble and new energies emerge, we find ourselves face to face with signs that this dragon goddess is returning. But her awakening is not gentle. She comes as the earthquake that levels false foundations, as the fire that burns away what no longer serves, as the flood that washes away the debris of forgotten dreams. The question that echoes through the corridors of time is not whether she is coming, but whether you are prepared to remember who you were before you forgot. The threads of this ancient tapestry are being rewoven in our time, appearing in dreams that leave dreamers gasping with recognition, in sudden knowings that arise without explanation, in the inexplicable urge to dance under the full moon or tend to plants with your bare hands. Women across the globe report feeling an unnamed restlessness, a calling towards something they cannot articulate but know with cellular certainty. Men speak of dreams filled with serpentine figures who offer both terror and initiation. The dragon goddess is not returning as dogma or doctrine, but as direct experience, bypassing the gatekeepers of organized religion and speaking directly to the DNA of remembrance. The very fact that her story was hidden tells us everything we need to know about her power. When the Roman Empire consolidated its control over emerging Christianity, when the Islamic conquests swept across ancient goddess cultures, when the Spanish conquistadors destroyed the codices of Mesoamerica, they were not merely establishing political dominance. They were engaged in what we might call archetypal warfare, the systematic dismantling of humanity's connection to the feminine principle of direct revelation. For the dragon goddess represented something far more dangerous than political rebellion. She embodied the possibility of spiritual autonomy, of receiving divine guidance without intermediaries, of finding the sacred in the body rather than in transcendence of it. To understand the magnitude of what we are witnessing in our time, we must first journey back to the world that existed before her exile. In the beginning, according to the hidden teachings, there was no separation between heaven and earth, between spirit and matter, between the sacred and the profane. The earliest human civilizations recognized the divine feminine as the source from which all life emerged and to which all life returned. She was simultaneously the virgin and the whore, the mother and the destroyer, the healer and the one who brought necessary endings. She was, in essence, the full spectrum of existence itself, unmarked by the moral categories that would later be imposed upon her. The Mesopotamians knew her as Tiamat, the primordial goddess of the salt waters, whose body was carved up by the sky god Marduk to create the ordered cosmos. But the Enuma Elish, that ancient creation epic, can be read as more than mythology. It is the historical record of a paradigm shift, the moment when the chaotic, creative, feminine principle was subdued by the organizing, controlling, masculine principle. Tiamat was not evil, despite later interpretations. She was the dragon of infinite possibility, the womb of chaos from which all forms emerged. Her defeat marked the beginning of a world-view that would privilege order over creativity, control over flow, transcendence over embodiment. In the Hindu tradition, she survived as Kundalini Shakti, the serpent power that lies coiled at the base of the spine, waiting to rise through the chakras and unite the individual consciousness with cosmic consciousness. The tantric texts speak of her with reverence and terror, for she is the force that can liberate or destroy, depending on the readiness of the practitioner. Here, at least, her dual nature was preserved. She was both the path to enlightenment and the power that could annihilate the ego that sought to contain her. The tantric masters understood what the later patriarchal religions forgot, that the feminine divine cannot be domesticated, only honored. China gave her form as Nuwa, the serpent goddess who created humanity from yellow clay and who mended the pillars of heaven when they were broken by cosmic warfare. The ancient Chinese understood her as the principle of restoration and healing, the force that repairs what has been damaged by conflict between opposing principles. In the I Ching, she appears as the receptive principle, not passive, but dynamically responsive, the power that transforms what it receives into new forms of life. The Andean peoples knew her as Amaru, the great serpent of the underworld, who governed the waters that flow beneath the earth and the wisdom that flows beneath consciousness. In the Quero tradition, still practiced today in the high Andes, she is called upon as the teacher of Aini, the principle of reciprocity that maintains the balance between all forms of life. She is the goddess of the Hanak Pacha, the world above, and the Uku Pacha, the world below, the force that moves between all worlds and maintains their connection. But perhaps nowhere was her exile more complete than in the traditions that emerged from the Middle East. In the early Hebrew texts, she appears as Lilith, Adam's first wife, who refused to lie beneath him and was subsequently demonized as the killer of children and seducer of men. The rabbinical tradition transformed her from a goddess of sexual autonomy and spiritual equality into a cautionary tale about the dangers of feminine rebellion. Yet even in her demonization, traces of her original power remained. She was associated with the night, with dreams, with the liminal spaces where transformation occurs. She was the owl, the bird of wisdom that sees in darkness. She was the midwife of death and rebirth, the one who facilitated passages between worlds. In Mesoamerica, she was Coatlicue, the serpent skirt goddess, mother and destroyer, giver of life and death. The Aztecs understood her as the principle of duality itself, the force that encompasses all opposites. Her temple was filled with serpent imagery, and her priests learned to channel her power through ecstatic dance and ritual bloodletting. When the Spanish conquistadors arrived, they recognized immediately what they were confronting. Not just a political enemy, but a spiritual paradigm that threatened the very foundations of their worldview. The systematic destruction of Aztec codices was not just cultural genocide. It was an attempt to erase from human memory the possibility of a spirituality that included rather than transcended the body. The pattern repeats across cultures and continents. a primordial feminine force associated with serpents or dragons, embodying both creation and destruction, connected to water, blood, earth, and the cycles of death and rebirth. And everywhere, the same response from ascending patriarchal cultures: fear, suppression, demonization, exile. The question we must ask ourselves is why? What was so threatening about this particular archetypal configuration that it required such systematic elimination? The answer lies in what the dragon goddess represented: direct access to the divine without intermediaries. She was the principle of revelation through embodied experience rather than through transmitted doctrine. Her wisdom came not from books or teachers, but from the deep knowing that arises when consciousness is fully present in the body, fully engaged with the cyclical nature of existence, fully accepting of both creation and destruction as sacred processes. She represented a form of spirituality that could not be controlled by institutions, because it arose spontaneously from the intersection of individual consciousness with cosmic forces. Moreover, she represented a relationship to power that was fundamentally different from the hierarchical models that emerged with patriarchal civilization. Her power was not power over, but power with, not domination, but creative collaboration with the forces of life. If this message speaks to you, you'll want to go deeper. Get your copy of The Call of Sophia and start unlocking the wisdom within. Link in the description and pinned comment. She did not seek to transcend nature, but to dance with it, not to escape the body, but to find the divine within it. For civilizations built on conquest, on the subjugation of nature, on the control of women's sexuality and reproductive capacity, she represented an existential threat. The medieval period saw the most systematic attempt to erase her from human consciousness. The Inquisition was not merely a political tool, but a spiritual weapon aimed at eliminating any trace of the old goddess religions. The persecution of so-called witches was often the persecution of women who maintained traditional knowledge of herbs, healing, and the cycles of nature, knowledge that connected them to the feminine divine principle that the Church was determined to eliminate. The witch trials were, in essence, the final phase of a war against the dragon goddess that had been raging for centuries. But exile is not extinction. The archetypal patterns that were suppressed in the outer world went underground, persisting in dreams, in folk traditions, in alchemical symbolism, in the mystical traditions that arose within the very religions that had sought to eliminate them. The rose of the Sufi poets, the Shekinah of the Kabbalists, the Black Madonna of Christian mysticism, all carried traces of the exiled goddess, veiled in acceptable religious language, but preserving her essential nature for those who had eyes to see. Carl Jung understood this when he wrote about the collective unconscious and the return of the repressed feminine. He recognized that what had been expelled from consciousness does not disappear, but accumulates power in the depths, waiting for the moment when the conscious mind is ready to reintegrate what it had rejected. His work with patients revealed again and again the healing power of reconnection with the feminine principle, not as a gender category, but as a fundamental aspect of the human psyche that includes intuition, receptivity, cyclic thinking, and embodied wisdom. Contemporary depth psychology has built upon Jung's insights, recognizing that the current global crisis may be understood as the return of the repressed feminine on both individual and collective levels. The environmental crisis, the breakdown of patriarchal institutions, the rising mental health epidemic, the spiritual hunger that characterizes our age, all of these may be symptoms of a civilization that has cut itself off from the feminine principle of life-giving, life-sustaining wisdom. Astrologically, we are witnessing planetary configurations that seem to echo this archetypal return. The asteroid Lilith, representing the dark feminine, has been prominently placed in collective charts, triggering collective memories of what was lost when the goddess was exiled. Pluto, the planet of death and transformation, has been moving through signs that govern power structures and collective beliefs, systematically exposing and dismantling the false foundations upon which our civilization has been built. Neptune, governing the collective unconscious and spiritual dissolution, has been activating the deep psychic waters where the suppressed feminine has been waiting. The lunar nodes, known in Vedic astrology as the head and tail of the dragon, have been activating areas of the collective chart associated with hidden wisdom and ancestral memory. Ancient astrologers understood the nodes as points where the individual soul intersects with collective destiny, where personal karma meets transpersonal purpose. Their current positioning suggests that we are at a moment when the collective must integrate lessons that have been avoided for centuries. But perhaps most significantly, we are witnessing what astrologers call the return of the divine feminine through the activation of previously unknown or little-studied asteroids and dwarf planets. Sedna, named for the Inuit goddess of the sea, represents the deep feminine wisdom that emerges from suffering and transformation. Eris, the goddess of discord, challenges false harmonies and forces authentic truth to emerge. These newly discovered celestial bodies are bringing into consciousness aspects of the feminine that have been invisible to astrology for centuries, suggesting that our understanding of the cosmic feminine is expanding to include previously hidden dimensions. The signs of this archetypal return are appearing not just in the heavens, but in the lived experience of countless individuals around the globe. Women report dreams of serpents speaking in languages they do not know, but somehow understand. They experience spontaneous urges to create altars, to work with their hands in earth, to howl at the moon, to bleed consciously during their menstrual cycles. Many describe a profound dissatisfaction with conventional spirituality, a hunger for something more direct, more embodied, more connected to the rhythms of the natural world. Men, too, are experiencing this return, though often through crisis rather than calling. The collapse of traditional masculine roles, the epidemic of depression and suicide among men, the desperate search for meaning in a culture that has stripped away the initiatory passages that once guided boys into conscious manhood. All of these may be understood as symptoms of disconnection from the feminine principle that gives life meaning and depth. Many men report dreams of powerful feminine figures who offer both terror and healing, who demand that they surrender their need to control and learn instead to collaborate with forces greater than themselves. The return is also manifesting in collective phenomena that defy conventional explanation. The spontaneous emergence of goddess spirituality movements around the world, the resurgence of interest in ancient wisdom traditions, the growing recognition of indigenous knowledge systems that were dismissed by colonial science, all of these point to a collective awakening to ways of knowing that had been systematically suppressed. In the realm of healing, we see the emergence of modalities that work with the body's innate wisdom rather than imposing external treatments. Energy healing, plant medicine work, somatic therapy, and other approaches that trust the body's capacity for self-regulation and healing represent a return to the feminine principle of allowing rather than forcing, of supporting natural processes rather than overriding them. The explosion of interest in these modalities suggests a collective hunger for healing approaches that honor the wisdom inherent in living systems. The environmental movement, too, can be understood as an expression of the returning feminine. The recognition that the Earth is a living system rather than a collection of resources to be exploited. The understanding that human well-being is inseparable from ecological health. The growing movement toward regenerative rather than extractive practices. All of these represent a return to the feminine principle of reciprocity and relationship that characterized pre-patriarchal societies. But this return is not without its challenges. The dragon goddess does not return as a gentle mother figure, but as a force of necessary destruction. She comes to burn away what is false, to shatter structures that no longer serve life, to expose the shadow that has accumulated during centuries of repression. Her return often manifests first as chaos, as the breakdown of familiar patterns, as the eruption of emotions and energies that have been long suppressed. Many individuals experiencing this return report periods of intense emotional upheaval, the collapse of relationships and career paths that once provided security, profound disorientation as familiar reference points dissolve. This is not pathology, but initiation, the necessary dissolution that precedes rebirth. The dragon goddess is both midwife and destroyer, the force that facilitates transitions by making the old forms untenable. Contemporary psychology is beginning to recognize what indigenous cultures have always known, that periods of apparent breakdown may actually be breakthroughs, moments when the psyche is reorganizing itself around a deeper truth. Spiritual emergency, as transpersonal psychologists call it, may be the return of authentic spiritual experience to a consciousness that has been cut off from its source. The symptoms that our culture pathologizes, hearing voices, seeing visions, experiencing unity consciousness, feeling connected to non-ordinary realities, may be signs of a psyche that is remembering its true nature. The new witch hunts of our time are not conducted with fire and stake, but with psychiatric diagnosis and social marginalization. Women who exhibit too much power, too much sexuality, too much wildness are labeled as borderline, bipolar, or mentally ill. Men who experience spiritual emergence are medicated into compliance. The dragon goddess represents a threat to a society built on control and consumption, so her return is often met with attempts to suppress, medicate, or institutionalize those who embody her energy. But unlike the medieval period, when suppression was largely successful, our contemporary moment offers unprecedented opportunities for the integration of this returning energy. Global communication allows individuals who are experiencing this return to find each other, to share their experiences, to recognize that they are not isolated or insane, but part of a larger movement of consciousness. Ancient wisdom traditions that were once accessible only to a few are now available to anyone with internet access. Scientific research is beginning to validate what indigenous peoples have always known about consciousness, healing, and the interconnectedness of all life. The practical implications of this return are vast and still unfolding. In relationships, we see a movement away from codependency and power over dynamics toward partnership and mutual empowerment. In parenting, there is growing interest in approaches that honor children's innate wisdom rather than molding them into predetermined forms. In education, alternative approaches that engage multiple forms of intelligence and honor different learning styles are gaining recognition. In business, there is increasing awareness of the need for organizational structures that are more organic, more collaborative, more responsive to the needs of all stakeholders. The Dragon Goddess principle challenges us to reimagine power itself. Rather than power as domination, she offers power as creative collaboration with life forces. Rather than power as accumulation, she offers power as circulation and sharing. Rather than power as separation from others, she offers power as recognition of interdependence. These are not merely idealistic concepts, but practical necessities for a species that must learn to live sustainably on a finite planet. Her return also calls us to rediscover the sacred dimension of sexuality. The split between sexuality and spirituality that characterizes patriarchal religions dissolves in her presence. She reveals sexuality as one of the primary ways that humans can experience the divine directly, through the body, in relationship, in the creative force that generates new life. This is not about libertarian rejection of all boundaries, but about conscious sexuality that honors both pleasure and responsibility, that recognizes sexual energy as sacred energy. The healing arts are being transformed by her return. Rather than treating symptoms, her medicine addresses root causes. Rather than imposing healing from outside, she awakens the healing wisdom that already exists within each being. Rather than separating healer from patient, she recognizes that healing happens in relationship, in the sacred space that emerges when two beings meet with authentic presence. Her healers are not authorities but facilitators, not experts but companions on the journey of discovery. In the realm of creativity, her return is evident in the explosion of interest in expressive arts, in creative practices that prioritize process over product, in artistic forms that emerge from deep listening rather than conceptual planning. She inspires art that heals, that connects, that transforms both creator and witness. Her creativity is not about producing objects for consumption, but about participating in the ongoing creation of the world. For those who feel called to work with this returning energy, there are specific practices that can support the integration process. The first is the cultivation of relationship with the body as a source of wisdom. This might involve practices like yoga, dance, martial arts, or simply spending time in nature and allowing the body to guide movement and breath. The goal is not physical fitness, but embodied awareness, the recognition that the body is not a machine to be optimized, but a living temple through which the divine expresses itself. The second practice involves working with the cycles of death and rebirth that are fundamental to the dragon goddess energy. This might involve moon cycle awareness, seasonal celebrations, vision questing, or simply learning to recognize and honor the natural cycles of expansion and contraction, activity and rest, creation and destruction that govern all life. Learning to cooperate with these cycles rather than fighting them is essential for anyone seeking to embody this energy. The third practice is the cultivation of receptivity alongside creativity. The dragon goddess is not only the force that creates, but also the space that receives. Practices like meditation, deep listening, dream work, and divination can help develop the receptive capacity that allows new insights and energies to emerge. This receptivity is not passive, but actively welcoming, a conscious opening to whatever wants to be born through us. Working with plant allies has become an important aspect of reconnection with the dragon goddess for many people. Plants like mugwort, red clover, rose, and serpentine herbs are traditionally associated with feminine wisdom and can support the process of remembering. This work should always be approached with respect and, when appropriate, with experienced guidance. The goal is not escape from ordinary consciousness, but rather the integration of expanded awareness into daily life. Dream work is particularly important for those connecting with this energy, as the dragon goddess often communicates through dreams and other non-ordinary states of consciousness. Keeping a dream journal, learning to dialogue with dream figures, and recognizing dreams as sources of guidance rather than mere mental chatter can help establish conscious relationship with the archetypal realm where she dwells. Creating sacred space in daily life becomes essential when working with this energy. This might involve setting up an altar, dedicating time for ritual or ceremony, or simply maintaining awareness of the sacred dimension of ordinary activities like cooking, cleaning, or caring for others. The dragon goddess does not require elaborate temples, but she does require recognition, acknowledgement of her presence in the midst of life. For women, this might involve reclaiming aspects of feminine experience that have been pathologized or suppressed. Learning to track menstrual cycles as sources of wisdom rather than inconvenience. Exploring sexuality as sacred rather than shameful. Allowing emotions to flow rather than controlling them. Honoring intuition alongside rational thinking. It might involve connecting with other women in circles that prioritize sharing and mutual support over competition and judgment. For men, the integration often involves learning to access their own inner feminine without trying to control or possess it. This might mean developing emotional intelligence, learning to collaborate rather than dominate, honoring the feminine in their partners without idealizing or demonizing it, and finding their own relationship to the creative, receptive, nurturing aspects of their nature. It often involves grieving the loss of authentic masculine initiation and finding new ways to enter conscious manhood. The return of the dragon goddess is not a return to some imagined golden age of matriarchy. It is the integration of an essential aspect of human consciousness that has been missing from our collective awareness for centuries. This integration is not about replacing patriarchy with matriarchy, but about transcending the binary altogether, moving toward ways of being that include and honor both masculine and feminine principles in their fullest expressions. The challenges of this integration are real and should not be minimized. When suppressed energy returns, it often carries the charge of everything that was denied during its exile. There may be periods of anger, grief, and chaos as individuals and collectives process centuries of accumulated trauma. There may be overcorrection as the pendulum swings from one extreme toward another. There may be projection and shadow work as people struggle to integrate aspects of themselves that they have been taught to reject. But these challenges are birth pains, the necessary struggles that accompany any profound transformation. The dragon goddess is not interested in our comfort, but in our wholeness. She comes not to make life easier, but to make it more alive, more authentic, more connected to the source of all being. Her medicine is often bitter before it is sweet, destructive before it is creative, terrifying before it is liberating. The global implications of this return are still unfolding. But we can see early signs in the breakdown of systems that depend on the exploitation of the feminine principle. The environmental crisis forces us to recognize our dependence on the Earth's living systems. The mental health crisis reveals the costs of disconnection from our own inner wisdom. The political upheavals of our time expose the unsustainability of power structures based on domination rather than cooperation. As more individuals integrate this returning energy, we may see the emergence of new forms of governance, economics, education, and healthcare that are based on feminine principles of relationship, sustainability, and whole system health. These will not be systems imposed from above, but organic developments that emerge from the grassroots as people embody different ways of being and relating. The dragon goddess does not offer a program or a set of beliefs, but a way of being that is responsive to life, creative in the face of challenge, and resilient in the face of change. She teaches through experience rather than doctrine, through embodied knowing rather than intellectual understanding. Her wisdom cannot be packaged or commodified because it emerges fresh in each moment, unique to each individual and situation. As we stand at this threshold moment in human history, feeling the tremors of profound change rippling through every aspect of our civilization, we are being called to remember something that our ancestors knew, but that we have forgotten. We are being called to remember that we are not separate from the earth, but expressions of it. Not masters of nature, but participants in it. Not isolated individuals, but interconnected aspects of a larger web of consciousness. The dragon goddess returns not as savior, but as catalyst, not as answer, but as question, not as destination, but as guide on a journey that each of us must take in our own way. She reminds us that the divine is not somewhere else, but right here. Not in some future heaven, but in this present moment, not outside the body but within it, not beyond the world, but at its very heart. The manuscript sealed with rose, serpent, and dragon was never really lost. It was simply written in a language we had forgotten how to read. That language is the language of the body, of dreams, of intuition, of direct experience. It is the language spoken by trees and rivers, by our own breathing, by the beating of our hearts. It is the language of life itself, and we are all native speakers if we can only remember. The code is not in some external text, but in our own DNA, in the spiraling double helix that carries the memory of billions of years of evolution, in the cellular wisdom that knows how to heal, how to create, how to transform. The rose, the serpent, and the dragon live within us, waiting to be awakened by our willingness to remember who we really are. This is not the end of the story, but the beginning. The dragon goddess does not return to establish a new dogma, but to liberate us from all dogmas, to restore our birthright of direct communion with the source of all being. Her gift is not comfort, but freedom. The freedom to be fully human in all our complexity, to embrace both creation and destruction as sacred processes, to find the divine not through escape from the world, but through deeper engagement with it. The question is not whether you believe in the dragon goddess, but whether you are willing to let her believe in you. She believes in your capacity to transform, to heal, to create, to love beyond all the limitations you have accepted as real. She believes in your ability to remember what you came here to remember, to become what you came here to become, to give what you came here to give. In this moment, as you read these words, she is stirring in the depths of your being, in the coiled power at the base of your spine, in the wild creativity of your heart, in the untamed wisdom of your intuition. She is the voice that whispers in the night, calling you home to yourself. She is the force that breaks open your heart so that love can flow more freely. She is the power that burns away everything false so that your authentic self can emerge. The return has already begun. The only question is whether you will recognize it, welcome it, and allow it to transform you. The rose, the serpent, and the dragon await your recognition. The code is alive, and it is calling your name. If these words have awakened something dormant within you, if you feel the stirring of ancient memory in your bones, if you recognize the voice of the dragon goddess speaking through the silence between these sentences, then you are already part of her return. Join the countless others who are remembering, who are awakening, who are allowing themselves to be transformed by this returning tide of feminine wisdom. Share this message with those who have ears to hear, who have hearts ready to remember, who have the courage to embody the change they wish to see in the world.